All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. I am Jeremy on the training team, and I will be leading our call today. If you have any questions, anything that you're having issues with, please just let me know. Type it up in the chat, type it up in the Q&A. Anything that you're having problems with, anything you're curious about, anything you want me to take a look at, and I'll be happy to do my best. Kind of going over whatever we've got. So yeah, feel free to type up any questions or thoughts, and we'll get started here in a second. All right. Well, while we're waiting to see if anyone else will post any questions and if anyone else will be joining, I'll kind of do the usual um, highlights and things like that. Check out our decision support YouTube channel. We put all of the lunch and learns on the channel. We've got, weekly content of different kind of new topics, different unique things. Um, we've recently put up a video about repository. We've got some videos about steps that we're starting to do now, our step-by-step series where we take a kind of deeper dive into steps and how to troubleshoot them and common issues and what the main functionality of them is, stuff like that. And then we also got our solutions marketplace. So if you want to check out any various applications and things like that that we have available, it's marketplace.decisions.com as well if you didn't get the QR code. Um, but a large number of different kind of applications and things that you can check out if you wanted to, read about them or, learn more about whatever we've got. And you can always check out any of those things. So please feel free to, you know, um, check these out, click around, kind of see what we've got, see if there's anything that interests you in either of those places. Otherwise, go ahead and just take a look at a couple things and see some stuff in decisions. Do you want to point out a couple things too? I was just kind of looking at some of this stuff today because I keep forgetting to upgrade my decisions, but 9.2 has come out recently. So something neat if you want to check out anything, any of the new updates. If you go to our documentation, you can check out the release notes. But there's a lot of really cool things that I think are useful in this update that I'm personally kind of excited for. Stuff like the recent searches we've added. So, if I have, in my search, if I'm searching for something in the portal, right, and I search something, I'll get like whatever I've searched, all of my results and stuff like that. But maybe I keep having to search for the same kind of thing over and over again or similar words or anything like that, because I've been working through a bunch of stuff in a day. If I want easy access to that, I have to type it new every single time, and obviously typing longer things makes that more difficult or something like, IDs and stuff. But we actually in 9.2 have added recent searches. So you can actually search for, see the things that you have searched for recently. So especially important if you've got, things happening, if you've got things happening like, in this case, these are like tickets, right? So there's pretty complex numbers. You don't want to have to search those over and over again or type them over and over again or find where you've copied them over and over again. You can get those in the recent searches. So I think that that's a pretty neat update in 9.2. Something definitely very useful and, something kind of neat. But there's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to go through all of it. This isn't release notes class. We're kind of talking about other things and stuff too. So, but a lot of other kind of neat things too. So a lot of visual changes, which I know is one of the big goals in version 9. There's a lot of nice visuals, make things look nicer, and kind of further functionality as we update. Another cool thing that I think too, if you have repositories, changing some icons up here, so you actually have icons within a project that tell you directly what you can do with it. So if you want to just check in or check out projects straight from that project up at the top will have that capability as well. Um, so instead of, some of these options up here, I can just immediately go and check this in from this space up here. So some pretty neat stuff. Um, and I'm probably going to be upgrading soon. I just kind of kept forgetting and have pushed it off a little bit, working on other projects and things. But 9.2's got some really neat stuff in it. Um, and as a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. Always happy to help. Always happy to poke around, try out some things, and see if there's anything that we can take a look at or kind of uh, learn about together. All right, if we don't have any questions, I'm gonna just kind of mess around a little bit with some rule sets while we wait. Something that I haven't done a ton of since version 9 is updated, and I used to do a lot with rule sets. So we're just gonna make a test rule set to kind of check out some things and see what the menus look like and stuff in version 9, because our actual design of rule sets is quite a bit different than it used to look in version 8. So I'll kind of just take a quick look at that in case anyone has any questions. Oh, actually, we do have a question. So I'll come back to this if we need to, but we have a question from Peter. I'd be interested for any tips and best practices on updating flows and data structures once they already have a lot of dependencies and implementations. That's a very good question. Um, yeah, so let's talk about a couple things related to that. So first of all, one of the things that we push just in general with having a lot of dependencies, not just in within one project, but with multiple projects and things like that, is to consider using this concept of a global resources project whenever we're talking about, your main projects and then having anything that may be dependent on those things, especially the more projects you have, right? Like here, this is my in my example, I've got a number of these training projects, some test projects and things. But if I have a lot of projects and they all have links to each other in different ways, like, oh, this needs a data structure that I'm also using in the insurance claim and in Lunch and Learn. And then, data modeling has a flow that I'm using in Lunch and Learn and in the training repository testing and so on and so forth, right? If I've got a lot of connections between all these things, it becomes kind of a mess if I have just a web of dependencies kind of randomly linking all of these things to each other. And it makes it a lot more difficult to manage and deal with potential updates to those things. So when you're working with multiple projects, we actually find that it's best, and we highly suggest creating a special separate project called global resources. And if you tend to have any things, I think mine is currently empty, but if you tend to have any like flows or structures or anything that's utilized in multiple projects, have those items placed in your global resources project instead. That way, when you're doing any kind of checking in, checking out, they can all depend on just this thing. So instead of having a flow from data modeling that's used in a couple places, and a data structure in purchase request that's used in a couple places, and a rule in Lunch and Learn that's used in a couple places, all three of those things can be built or moved to this global resources project. So now that global resources project will have those those flows, rules, data structures, whatever that's being utilized in multiple places. And then what we can do is we can simply add dependencies to other projects. And so, this is my Lunch and Learn project. If I go to configuration and dependencies, I can manage the dependencies and say, what does this project depend on? And so then rather than this project depending on global resources, data modeling, insurance claim, and repository testing, if all of those shared resources are just in my global resources project, I only have one place that I have to manage those shared items. So now this project can depend on this item, and I don't have to worry about any various connections and things right? Or like a mix up of anything like that, right? And then, if we need to say, hey, I need to make an update, and the update that I need to change relies on one of these items that's used across other projects. Obviously, I shouldn't just go in and make that change automatically, because if I make a change there, it'll affect other places. But now this is where I can say and have communication with my team and say, hey, for this, I think it would be better if we made an adjustment to my global resources project. And then as a team, you can decide that's what we want to do. You make changes. Since we made changes in this one place, it'll persist for all of the other projects that utilize that item. Um, so that's one of the really good ways, especially with when you're utilizing the repository and stuff for projects and connecting things. Oh, sorry, apologies. Um, Yeah, so that's one thing. And then also in relation to that, whenever you're doing any kind of checking in and checking out in a project, what's recommended is do any of the checking in with your global resources first. So then you'll check in all of those things that are heavily dependent on in other projects. So you'll check in your global resources to the repository first, then check in your other projects into the repository next. And kind of go down in that order so that you have the most heavy dependencies getting checked in first, followed by the ones that have least dependencies into them when you're checking in data. So to kind of help make sure that everything is going through, that there's no issues with the way that those connections are working. So that's I think one of the biggest best practices and things that we typically say in relation to if you need to update flows and stuff like that, after you've already started a process and things like that. If you have multiple projects, within a project, things are a little different. We definitely don't recommend changing data structures mid-project, right? Like I have this sample data structure. If I go and I try to edit it and I make changes, I think it even gives me a warning. Especially if like, oh, maybe I decide this example integer, I want it to be a decimal instead, right? Because I think it's better. It'll tell, I mean, we even tell you, hey, this change may potentially cause problems. So making a lot of changes to your data structures like mid-process can be very dangerous, especially if it's data types. Simply adding a new element to a data structure might not be too heavily problematic, but removing things could be bad. Changing the data structure, like the data type behind them, could cause a lot of issues because you may already have data in process related to that. So we do not recommend changing your data structures um, mid-process, and because of the various implications that could cause. So there may be other ways, and that's where kind of modeling your data and planning ahead can be very important ahead of time, saying like this is what's important, and making sure that you're prepared for what you want to do with your data when you're setting up data structures ahead of time and stuff like that. Um, when it comes to flows, um, and updating things like that, obviously you want to worry about potential dependency issues and things if other things are utilizing flows even just within the same project. And in a lot of cases you'll see that happening sometimes if you make a change to a project. You'll see, and you try to like save your project, you'll see, hey, there's a broken dependency because I've made a change. Like if I go to maybe just kind of some previous example here, and let's say I want to uh, remove this as an output, and I go to save it, right? It'll tell me there's a broken dependency because the flow that this subflow is sitting in is already kind of expecting and utilizing the output that I removed. So we do kind of warn you about things sometimes, and it'll tell us, hey, it'll affect this flow because this flow is using my format phone number flow in it, and it may kind of give you a warning of that sometimes. So you always want to be careful of those kinds of things. So in this case, oh, I broke this dependency. Maybe I did it on purpose and I know that, but maybe I didn't do it on purpose. So I don't want to save that data because I don't want to actually make that change to my process. So there's a few kinds of things related to that you can always kind of keep in mind. We also, the whole repository concept really helps because you do have the ability to roll back some element. So if you do, make changes to your flows and you can't undo those changes, you can always roll back to them. Um, and stuff like that. You can also create checkpoints too. Like if you're planning on making something, I plan on making some pretty heavy changes to this, and I don't want to lose this original version with the changes that I'll make. I can checkpoint this version, give it a name and save it as this checkpoint. And then if I decide that I don't like what I've done, I can revert back and I can, go backwards and, reopen this checkpoint or, reopen this flow according to that checkpoint that was saved. So there's quite a few different ways that it can be done for sure. I don't know if Jared or uh, anyone else on our side that's on our call maybe have any other suggestions as general best practices for updating flows and data structures and things once we've already implemented and have a lot of dependencies and stuff to them.
I think, yeah, you covered it as far as I know. Yeah, you did a thorough job. I don't have any more to add to that. I mean, obviously he said it, but it's one of those things you just got to be really careful about. Especially if things are already in production, like there might be a better option rather than changing structure, maybe adding an extension onto it or something,
Yeah,
potentially. Um, but it is one to updating flows. I mean, it depends on where in your deployment process you're at too. Like if you're if you're going through the process and you have things in production and you want to update a flow, you should follow that natural kind of process of having dev check it out, make the changes, check it back into repo, and then check out. Like you don't I don't know where in your spectrum of understanding of that concept it is, but you don't necessarily want to make any changes in your production environment. Like you don't want to update flows or data structures in your production environment at all.
yeah, and also on the side of flows too, you can always make copies of things. So, if you already have this like solid working one and you want to throw some example just to test it and check and see if something else is working, I can just create a copy of this. I have the exact same flow just separately, and now the changes that I make in my copy won't persist in the original, so I can kind of adjust and maybe do some testing and things there. Um, obviously you want to be a little too careful not to overload all of this stuff with copies, but something that may be useful to you sometimes as well. Okay. Yeah. So we'll move on for now because we do have another question. But if you have come up with anything else or other directed questions, Peter, just let us know. I'll be happy to talk more if we have more time. But I'm going to move over to Manal's question. He says, "Hello, how to add a file upload to the data repeater and then save the input? I have a file upload in a data repeater, and whenever I upload a file, it does not save." So I'll give you the opportunity to talk if you want to share any more information or anything else, and you can kind of add anything if you need to while I get started making an example.
Hey Jeremy, I just have like a regular form and a data repeater in it. And
Mhm.
then in that data repeater, I have a file upload option, but it works completely fine. The only problem is, and I also have it as a file reference rather than just like file data. The only thing it doesn't save. So it will show me that I'll upload the file, then I do save for later, come back, it just doesn't come up, but every other field shows up on that data repeater. Unless if I'm missing something, or is there a trick? Because I even tried doing a multi-file upload because I was using file reference, and that caused like the data repeater not to work. So I was just wondering, is there a certain thing?
Okay, let's just let me just do some stuff in here real quick. Throw a submit button at the bottom of this real quick. And I'm going to throw this into a flow. Oh, it wasn't. Okay. I should probably be better about naming my flows and forms and stuff. 'Cause I all immediately forgot that that's what I called it. Okay. So let's say I didn't actually add any add buttons. Okay. So we got something like this, right? Your add data repeater, throw in some files and things into it. You got something kind of similar to this, right? That we're talking about. And then can you clarify again what you're trying to do next? Is it that you don't see outputs or that it's not saving?
It's not saving. So if I do like save for later, it would not show up as a view form, or even if like I come back, save for later, it doesn't show up as a file.
Got it. Okay. I think
So for maybe if you put like another form after the form and do submit and just show that data repeater has a output on that, I wonder if that would save.
let's say like this. Upload the files. Yeah, so I mean it looks like so it appears here, right? It's in process in my form. I get like the data of these items here. Um, but then the biggest thing here now is as soon as like if I close this flow or anything like that, this data is gone because right at the moment it's all just kind of temporarily sitting here, right? Um, so then if you want to save it, if you want that to go somewhere, then this is the point where you need to decide like what exactly you want to do with like your data because you can take it and you can save it. If you have a data structure that's holding the file data of these files, you could do that. You've got you said you wanted to use
I'm using the extension data, I mean the process folder to save all this stuff.
okay. Do you have a
Mhm.
field in your process folder that can hold it, or are
So
you
what
just
I
trying to save it somewhere else?
so what I did is like I have a separate data structure that I use for the data repeater in which I'm saving all the stuff from the data repeater, and then I
Hmm.
just use. So I took that data structure and added to my flow execution data structure where everything exists for that process folder, and then I just map it in. It's just funny because everything works, like everything shows up in that data repeater whichever I enter, but just not my file does not show up in that data repeater if I do save for later and come back to the form.
Hmm.
So,
If
mhm.
oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Quick question. Do you recommend, for example, is it because I'm doing file reference and I'm saving it in data structure file reference? Do I have to make it a list or not? Because I thought we do have to make it a list.
Yeah, if you want like the the list would come from like if you want, right? Someone could upload, 5 files, and you want all 5 of those files to be in that same spot, something like that. That's where the list would kind of come into play, and you would want to think about the list going in. That's kind of why I had originally looked at it like that. Um, right? If you want them to all kind of be in that same exact under that same specific place. Um, one thing I know, if you can, like, if you're trying to save your data, you can take like the combination of these 2 steps to save it as a file reference directly into the folder,
Okay.
instead of necessarily, putting it in your data structure in that way, right? The load from file data step will take your file data, right, which is what's coming out of, uh, their everything that they're outputting is a list of file data. So obviously, if it's a list, then you'd use a for each to do this. But the load from file data will take that and change it from file data and set it as a file reference. And then you can use our internal services step. Do you have version 8 or version 9?
I'm version 8.
Version 8. Okay. It'll look a little bit different. In version 9, we consolidated this into one step. In version 8, you would go to integration and then expand internal services. And instead of this one step, you'll see a list of all the internal services. Uh, and that'll be like this list. So it's this exact list that I have right here. It'll just be in your toolbox, looking down. Otherwise, it's the same thing. Um, but we have a file reference service which has like steps and things that are specific to file references. So if you want to use the file references, you can set file reference service, and then underneath file reference service, which will be another drop down that you have in the toolbox here, you expand that down, you'll have a list of the actual steps that we can use with file reference services. Um, and adding, downloading files, whatever, but create entity from file reference is the step that will save it. And it'll actually take that and it'll save it into a folder. So all you need to do is input a folder ID, and then you can actually just place the file reference from your load from file data step to, then save the file reference into that folder. So maybe instead of necessarily putting it as like a data structure in your that you're trying to use, you can just take the data from your form and save it into that process folder. Make sure you just get the correct ID from the process folder that you're looking at, and then you should be able to just those the file references will now be in that folder. So even if you come back later or you don't finish this flow and you try to complete the flow at a different time, right, you should be able to take that. So, if I grab this as the output of my data repeater with all the file data, then my load from file data, I can load that item and it'll set it to the file reference. And then my create entity from file reference step that you get from integration internal services, I can make the load from file data output. And then obviously you'd have to have the ID of the item that you want. Send it back to your for each step to
Gotcha.
loop through and get all of the items. And there you'll be able to actually save everything from, all of these file data items um, directly into that folder. So it'll appear rather than in the data structure, it'll appear actually just on the folder. And then you can always pull from that folder and stuff anytime.
Got it. Because I was in the I was thinking like on the data repeater, you always need to save all that data to the data structure. I thought you can't, if you don't put an input in the data repeater, the data won't save. So if
Um,
you go into the data repeater, let me see.
you're talking about in here.
Yes, and then you probably added like a data structure, right? Oh, so you just did the file data. So usually what I do is I put a data structure in there, and then
Mhm.
from that data structure, I map my fields on that data repeater.
Yeah. So you can use, your own created types and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
within it, but we still have our decisions native types like file data that you can
Okay.
have this grab from it. The data repeater doesn't always have to be, you know, your all your own created types. It can always expand to more things.
Gotcha. And then you chose that select file as a data file reference, or did you do the file data select file
You're talking about,
in
oh,
writing?
you're talking about on like this
Yes.
item here.
So if
Um,
I do file reference, then would I need those other steps to convert it to file from file
you
to reference?
No, you wouldn't need the load from file data. The create entity from file references is what takes the file reference
Mm-hmm.
and saves it um into your folder. So
Okay.
yeah, if you use this, it'll output file ref. It should output file reference. It should
Okay.
output it as a file reference,
Gotcha.
um, or whatever, and then you can skip the need for this step, and then you can just grab it directly into this.
Okay. Gotcha. I'll definitely try that. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. All right. Um, any other questions from anyone in the call today? So far, that's all the questions we've received. Apologies again. All right. Um, well, if we don't have any questions, it does look like our attendees are starting to drop as well. So we can go ahead and end our lunch and learn there. We still have a couple other lunch and learns this week. So, if you have any other questions or if you just like to attend and observe, uh, or anything like that, please feel free to join in. And we'll be happy to discuss. We got Robert and Jared closing off the rest of this week. So, two great trainers, happy to help and interested in answering some more questions. Thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you all next time on our Lunch and Learn.